The notion that all values are devoid of meaning and that communication or understanding is ultimately futile, plunges one into the depths of existential despair. It's like staring into an abyss where nothing seems to hold weight or significance. Think of it as a philosophical black hole, sucking away any sense of purpose or direction. At its core, a true nihilist is a wanderer in the void, devoid of any allegiance or conviction, save perhaps for a lingering desire to dismantle the very fabric of existence itself. Imagine a lone figure, drifting aimlessly through the universe, questioning the very foundations of reality with every step. Friedrich Nietzsche, often hailed as the prophet of nihilism, warned of its corrosive power, foreseeing a future where moral certainties crumble, religious dogmas dissolve, and metaphysical truths evaporate into thin air. It's as if he gazed into the crystal ball of human destiny and saw the looming shadow of nihilism casting its long, dark shadow over civilization. Throughout the 20th century, nihilistic themes reverberated through the works of artists, echoed in the critiques of social commentators, and pondered by philosophers wrestling with the implications of a universe devoid of inherent meaning. Existentialists, like Sartre and Camus, grappled with the void, seeking to find meaning in a world stripped bare by nihilism's relentless onslaught. Yet, as the century wore on, existential despair gave way to a resigned indifference, a shrug of the shoulders in the face of cosmic purposelessness. It's as if humanity collectively sighed and said, well, if nothing matters, then why bother? But amidst the darkness, there's a glimmer of hope. For in embracing the absurdity of existence, one can find a certain freedom, a freedom to create one's own meaning, to forge connections in a world devoid of inherent value. It's a defiant act of rebellion against the void, a refusal to surrender to nihilism's cold embrace. So, while nihilism may cast a long shadow over the human psyche, it also serves as a catalyst for introspection, a call to arms for those brave enough to confront the abyss and emerge on the other side, battered but unbroken, with a newfound sense of purpose forged in the fires of existential crisis. It has been over a century now since Nietzsche explored nihilism and its implications for civilization. As he predicted, nihilism's impact on the culture and values of the 20th century has been pervasive, its apocalyptic tenor spawning a mood of gloom and a good deal of anxiety, anger, and terror. Interestingly, Nietzsche himself, a radical skeptic preoccupied with language, knowledge, and truth, anticipated many of the themes of postmodernity. It's helpful to note, then, that he believed we could at a terrible price eventually work through nihilism. If we survived the process of destroying all interpretations of the world, we could then perhaps discover the correct course for humankind. 1. Origins. Nihilism comes from the Latin nihil, or nothing, which means not anything, that which does not exist. It appears in the verb, annihilate, meaning to bring to nothing, to destroy completely. Early in the 19th century, Friedrich Jacobi used the word to negatively characterize transcendental idealism. It only became popularized, however, after its appearance in Ivan Turgenev's novel Fathers and Sons, 1862, where he used nihilism to describe the crude scientism espoused by his character Bazarov, who preaches a creed of total negation. In Russia, nihilism became identified with a loosely organized revolutionary movement, c. 1860–1917, that rejected the authority of the state, church, and family. In his early writing, anarchist leader Mikhail Bakunin, 1814–1876, composed the notorious entreatise still identified with nihilism, Let us put our trust in the eternal spirit which destroys and annihilates only because it is the unsearchable and eternally creative source of all life. The passion for destruction is also a creative passion. Reaction in Germany, 1842. The movement advocated a social arrangement based on rationalism and materialism as the sole source of knowledge and individual freedom as the highest goal. By rejecting man's spiritual essence in favor of a solely materialistic one, nihilists denounced God and religious authority as antithetical to freedom. The movement eventually deteriorated into an ethos of subversion, destruction, and anarchy, and by the late 1870s, a nihilist was anyone associated with clandestine political groups advocating terrorism and assassination. The earliest philosophical positions associated with what could be characterized as a nihilistic outlook are those of the skeptics. Because they denied the possibility of certainty, skeptics could denounce traditional truths as unjustifiable opinions. When Demosthenes c. 371322 BC, for example, observes that what he wished to believe, that is what each man believes, Olympiac, he posits the relational nature of knowledge. Extreme skepticism, then, is linked to epistemological nihilism which denies the possibility of knowledge and truth. This form of nihilism is currently identified with postmodern anti-foundationalism. Nihilism, in fact, can be understood in several different ways. Political nihilism, as noted, is associated with the belief that the destruction of all existing political, social, and religious order is a prerequisite for any future improvement. Ethical nihilism or moral nihilism rejects the possibility of absolute moral or ethical values. Instead, good and evil are nebulous, and values addressing such are the product of nothing more than social and emotive pressures. Existential nihilism is the notion that life has no intrinsic meaning or value, and it is, no doubt, the most commonly used and understood sense of the word today. Max Stirner's 1806–1856 attacks on systematic philosophy, his denial of absolutes, and his rejection of abstract concepts of any kind often places him among the first philosophical nihilists. For Stirner, achieving individual freedom is the only law, and the state, which necessarily imperils freedom, must be destroyed. Even beyond the oppression of the state, though, are the constraints imposed by others because their very existence is an obstacle compromising individual freedom. Thus Stirner argues that existence is an endless war of each against all, the ego and its own, trans. 1907. 2. Friedrich Nietzsche and nihilism. Among philosophers, Friedrich Nietzsche is most often associated with nihilism. For Nietzsche, there is no objective order or structure in the world except what we give it. Penetrating the facades buttressing convictions, the nihilist discovers that all values are baseless and that reason is impotent. Every belief, every considering something true, Nietzsche writes, is necessarily false because there is simply no true world. Will to Power, notes from 1883–1888. For him, nihilism requires a radical repudiation of all imposed values and meaning. Nihilism is not only the belief that everything deserves to perish, but one actually puts one's shoulder to the plow, one destroys will to power. The caustic strength of nihilism is absolute, Nietzsche argues, and under its withering scrutiny, the highest values devalue themselves. The aim is lacking, and, why, finds no answer, will to power. Inevitably, nihilism will expose all cherished beliefs and sacrosanct truths as symptoms of a defective Western mythos. This collapse of meaning, relevance, and purpose will be the most destructive force in history, constituting a total assault on reality and nothing less than the greatest crisis of humanity. What I relate is the history of the next 2 centuries. I describe what is coming, what can no longer come differently, the advent of nihilism. For some time now our whole European culture has been moving us toward a catastrophe, with a tortured tension that is growing from decade to decade, restlessly, violently, headlong, like a river that wants to reach the end. Will to power. Since Nietzsche's compelling critique, nihilistic themes epistemological failure, value destruction, and cosmic purposelessness have preoccupied artists, social critics, and philosophers. Convinced that Nietzsche's analysis was accurate, for example, Oswald Spengler in The Decline of the West 1926 studied several cultures to confirm that patterns of nihilism were indeed a conspicuous feature of collapsing civilizations. In each of the failed cultures he examines, Spengler noticed that centuries-old religious, artistic, and political traditions were weakened and finally toppled by the insidious workings of several distinct nihilistic postures. The Faustian nihilist shatters the ideals, the Apollinian nihilist watches them crumble before his eyes, and the Indian nihilist withdraws from their presence into himself. Withdrawal, for instance, often identified with the negation of reality and resignation advocated by Eastern religions, is in the West associated with various versions of Epicureanism and Stoicism. In his study, Spengler concludes that Western civilization is already in the advanced stages of decay with all 3 forms of nihilism working to undermine epistemological authority and ontological grounding. In 1927, Martin Heidegger, to cite another example, observed that nihilism in various and hidden forms was already the normal state of man, the question of being. Other philosophers' predictions about nihilism's impact have been dire. Outlining the symptoms of nihilism in the 20th century, Helmut Thielicke wrote that nihilism literally has only one truth to declare, namely, that ultimately nothingness prevails and the world is meaningless. Nihilism, its origin and nature, with a Christian answer, 1969. From the nihilist's perspective, one can conclude that life is completely amoral, a conclusion, Thielicke believes, that motivates such monstrosities as the Nazi reign of terror. Gloomy predictions of nihilism's impact are also charted in Eugene Rose's Nihilism, The Root of the Revolution of the Modern Age, 1994. If nihilism proves victorious and it's well on its way, he argues our world will become a cold, inhuman world, where nothingness, incoherence, and absurdity will triumph. 3. Existential nihilism. While nihilism is often discussed in terms of extreme skepticism and relativism, for most of the 20th century it has been associated with the belief that life is meaningless. Existential nihilism begins with the notion that the world is without meaning or purpose. Given this circumstance, existence itself, all action, suffering, and feeling is ultimately senseless and empty. In The Dark Side, Thoughts on the Futility of Life, 1994, Alan Pratt demonstrates that existential nihilism, in one form or another, has been a part of the Western intellectual tradition from the beginning. The skeptic Empedocles' observation that the life of mortals is so mean a thing as to be virtually unlife, for instance, embodies the same kind of extreme pessimism associated with existential nihilism. In antiquity, such profound pessimism may have reached its apex with Hegesias of Cyrene. Because miseries vastly outnumber pleasures, happiness is impossible, the philosopher argues, and subsequently advocates suicide. Centuries later, during the Renaissance, William Shakespeare eloquently summarized the existential nihilist's perspective when, in this famous passage near the end of Macbeth, he has Macbeth pour out his disgust for life. Out, out, brief candle. Life's but a walking shadow, a poor player. that struts and frets his hour upon the stage, and then is heard no more. It is a tale, told by an idiot, full of sound and fury, signifying nothing. In the 20th century, it's the atheistic existentialist movement, popularized in France in the 1940s and 50s, that is responsible for the currency of existential nihilism in the popular consciousness. Jean-Paul Sartre's 1905–1980 defining preposition for the movement, "Existence precedes essence," rules out any ground or foundation for establishing an essential self or a human nature. When we abandon illusions, life is revealed as nothing, and for the existentialists, nothingness is the source of not only absolute freedom but also existential horror and emotional anguish. Nothingness reveals each individual as an isolated being, thrown into an alien and unresponsive universe, barred forever from knowing why yet required to invent meaning. It's a situation that's nothing short of absurd. Writing from the enlightened perspective of the absurd, Albert Camus (1913–1960) observed that Sisyphus' plight, condemned to eternal, useless struggle, was a superb metaphor for human existence. The Myth of Sisyphus, 1942. The common thread in the literature of the existentialists is coping with the emotional anguish arising from our confrontation with nothingness, and they expended great energy responding to the question of whether surviving it was possible. Their answer was a qualified yes, advocating a formula of passionate commitment and impassive stoicism. In retrospect, it was an anecdote tinged with desperation because in an absurd world there are absolutely no guidelines, and any course of action is problematic. Passionate commitment, be it to conquest, creation, or whatever, is itself meaningless. Enter nihilism. Camus, like the other existentialists, was convinced that nihilism was the most vexing problem of the 20th century. Although he argues passionately that individuals could endure its corrosive effects, his most famous works betray the extraordinary difficulty he faced building a convincing case. In The Stranger, 1942, for example, Mersault has rejected the existential suppositions on which the uninitiated and weak rely. Just moments before his execution for a gratuitous murder, he discovers that life alone is reason enough for living, a raison d'être, however, that in context seems scarcely convincing. In Caligula, 1944, the mad emperor tries to escape the human predicament by dehumanizing himself with acts of senseless violence, fails, and surreptitiously arranges his own assassination. The Plague, 1947, shows the futility of doing one's best in an absurd world. And in his last novel, the short and sardonic, The Fall, 1956, Camus posits that everyone has bloody hands because we are all responsible for making a sorry state worse by our inane action and inaction alike. In these works and other works by the existentialists, one is often left with the impression that living authentically with the meaninglessness of life is impossible. Camus was fully aware of the pitfalls of defining existence without meaning, and in his philosophical essay The Rebel, 1951, he faces the problem of nihilism head-on. In it, he describes at length how metaphysical collapse often ends in total negation and the victory of nihilism, characterized by profound hatred, pathological destruction, and incalculable violence and death. 4. Nihilism and anti-foundationalism. By the late 20th century, nihilism had assumed two different castes. In one form, nihilist is used to characterize the postmodern person, a dehumanized conformist, alienated, indifferent, and baffled, directing psychological energy into hedonistic narcissism or into a deep ressentiment that often explodes in violence. This perspective is derived from the existentialists' reflections on nihilism stripped of any hopeful expectations, leaving only the experience of sickness, decay, and disintegration. In his study of meaninglessness, Donald Crosby writes that the source of modern nihilism paradoxically stems from a commitment to honest intellectual openness. Once set in motion, the process of questioning could come to but one end: the erosion of conviction and certitude and collapse into despair, the spectre of the absurd, 1988. When sincere inquiry is extended to moral convictions and social consensus, it can prove deadly, Crosby continues, promoting forces that ultimately destroy civilizations. Michael Novak's recently revised The Experience of Nothingness, 1968, 1998 tells a similar story. Both studies are responses to the existentialists' gloomy findings from earlier in the century. And both optimistically discuss ways out of the abyss by focusing on the positive implications nothingness reveals, such as liberty, freedom, and creative possibilities. Novak, for example, describes how since World War II we have been working to climb out of nihilism, on the way to building a new civilization. In contrast to the efforts to overcome nihilism noted above is the uniquely postmodern response associated with the current anti-foundationalists. The philosophical, ethical, and intellectual crisis of nihilism that has tormented modern philosophers for over a century has given way to mild annoyance or, more interestingly, an upbeat acceptance of meaninglessness. French philosopher Jean-François Lyotard characterizes postmodernism as an incredulity toward metanarratives, those all-embracing foundations that we have relied on to make sense of the world. This extreme skepticism has undermined intellectual and moral hierarchies and made truth claims, transcendental or transcultural, problematic. Postmodern anti-foundationalists, paradoxically grounded in relativism, dismiss knowledge as relational and truth as transitory, genuine only until something more palatable replaces it, reminiscent of William James' notion of cash value. The critic Jacques Derrida, for example, asserts that one can never be sure that what one knows corresponds with what is. Since human beings participate in only an infinitesimal part of the whole, they are unable to grasp anything with certainty, and absolutes are merely fictional forms. American anti-foundationalist Richard Rorty makes a similar point: nothing grounds our practices, nothing legitimizes them, nothing shows them to be in touch with the way things are, from logic to language to play, 1986. This epistemological cul-de-sac, Rorty concludes, leads inevitably to nihilism. Faced with the non-human, the non-linguistic, we no longer have the ability to overcome contingency and pain by appropriation and transformation, but only the ability to recognize contingency and pain, contingency, irony, and solidarity, 1989. In contrast to Nietzsche's fears and the angst of the existentialists, nihilism becomes for the anti-foundationalists just another aspect of our contemporary milieu, one best endured with sang-froid. In The Banalization of Nihilism, 1992, Karen Carr discusses the anti-foundationalist response to nihilism. Although it still inflames a paralyzing relativism and subverts critical tools, cheerful nihilism carries the day, she notes, distinguished by an easy-going acceptance of meaninglessness. Such a development, Carr concludes, is alarming. If we accept that all perspectives are equally non-binding, then intellectual or moral arrogance will determine which perspective has precedence. Worse still, the banalization of nihilism creates an environment where ideas can be imposed forcibly with little resistance, raw power alone determining intellectual and moral hierarchies. It's a conclusion that dovetails nicely with Nietzsche's, who pointed out that all interpretations of the world are simply manifestations of will to power. 5. Cultural impact and social critiques. Cultural impact and social critiques of nihilism delve into the profound ways in which this philosophical stance permeates society, leaving an indelible mark on our collective consciousness. Nihilism's chilling embrace challenges the very foundations of cultural norms and values, prompting intense introspection and critique. Consider the ripple effects of nihilism on our artistic expressions, where the canvas becomes a battleground for grappling with the void. Artists, poets, and filmmakers confront the absurdity of existence head-on, weaving narratives that mirror the existential angst lurking within the human psyche. From the dark, dystopian landscapes of literature to the avant-garde experiments of modern art, nihilism's influence is palpable, shaping our perceptions of reality and pushing the boundaries of creative expression. Moreover, nihilism serves as a powerful lens through which to analyze societal structures and power dynamics. Social critics dissect the inherent contradictions and injustices embedded within our political and economic systems, exposing the hollow promises of progress and prosperity. Nihilism lays bare the emptiness at the heart of consumer culture, where material wealth serves as a poor substitute for genuine fulfillment and purpose. Yet, amidst the chaos and disillusionment, there are glimmers of resistance and resilience. Social movements emerge, fueled by a fervent desire to transcend nihilism's suffocating grasp and forge a more just and equitable world. Activists and revolutionaries rally against the forces of apathy and indifference, reclaiming agency in the face of existential despair. In essence, cultural impact and social critiques of nihilism serve as a call to action, challenging us to confront the uncomfortable truths that lie at the heart of our existence. By engaging with nihilism's unsettling questions and contradictions, we open the door to new possibilities for transformation and renewal, both individually and collectively. It's a journey fraught with uncertainty and peril, but one that holds the promise of profound insight and growth. 6. Nihilism in literature and art. Nihilism in literature and art serves as a haunting reflection of humanity's existential crisis, where the canvas becomes a battleground for grappling with the void. From the bleak landscapes of dystopian fiction to the fragmented narratives of postmodernist literature, nihilism's influence is palpable, shaping our understanding of identity, meaning, and reality itself. In literature, nihilism manifests in a variety of forms, from the existential despair of Camus, The Stranger, to the post-apocalyptic landscapes of Cormac McCarthy's The Road. Characters confront the absurdity of existence head-on, navigating a world devoid of inherent meaning or purpose. Through their journeys, we glimpse the profound emptiness at the heart of the human condition, a void that threatens to consume all sense of self and belonging. Similarly, in art, nihilism finds expression in the fractured compositions of abstract expressionism and the stark imagery of existential photography. Artists like Francis Bacon and Edward Munch confront the existential anguish of the modern psyche, capturing the dissonance between inner turmoil and external reality. Their works serve as a visceral reminder of the fragility of human existence, inviting viewers to confront the existential abyss that lurks within us all. Yet, amidst the darkness, there is beauty to be found. Nihilism in literature and art challenges us to confront the uncomfortable truths that lie at the heart of our existence, inviting us to embrace the uncertainty and chaos of life with courage and resilience. Through the act of creation, whether through writing, painting, or other forms of artistic expression, we reclaim agency in the face of existential despair, forging meaning in a world that often seems devoid of it. In essence, nihilism in literature and art serves as a testament to the enduring power of human creativity in the face of adversity. By grappling with the existential void through the medium of language and imagery, artists and writers offer us glimpses of hope and redemption, reminding us that even in the darkest of times, there is beauty to be found in the act of creation. 7. Moral and value vacuums. It refers to the philosophical and existential quandaries that arise when traditional systems of morality and values are called into question or deemed irrelevant. In essence, it's the unsettling realization that the guiding principles and ethical frameworks that once provided structure and meaning to our lives have been rendered obsolete or non-existent. Imagine standing at the edge of a vast abyss, where the moral certainties that once anchored your worldview have crumbled away, leaving only emptiness in their wake. In this vacuum, questions of right and wrong become muddled, and the very notion of virtue seems like a distant memory. The implications of moral and value vacuums are profound and far-reaching. Without a shared understanding of what is good and just, society becomes fragmented, with individuals and communities adrift in a sea of moral relativism. Trust erodes, social cohesion frays, and the bonds that once held us together begin to unravel. Yet, amidst the chaos, there is opportunity for renewal and reinvention. Freed from the constraints of outdated moral norms, we are challenged to reevaluate our beliefs and principles, to forge new pathways toward a more just and equitable society. It's a daunting task, to be sure, but one that holds the promise of profound transformation and growth. In confronting moral and value vacuums, we are forced to confront the fundamental questions of human existence. What kind of world do we want to live in? What values do we hold dear? And how do we navigate the moral complexities of the modern age? Ultimately, moral and value vacuums serve as a call to action, challenging us to confront the uncomfortable truths that lie at the heart of our existence. By grappling with the existential void left by the collapse of traditional morality, we open ourselves up to new possibilities for growth and renewal, both individually and collectively. It's a journey fraught with uncertainty and peril, but one that holds the promise of a brighter, more ethical future. Conclusion. Nietzsche's prophetic insight into the pervasive influence of nihilism on the 20th century and beyond is nothing short of remarkable. Indeed, the apocalyptic undertones of nihilism have cast a long shadow over our cultural landscape, fostering a sense of gloom and unease characterized by anxiety, anger, and even terror. What's truly intriguing is Nietzsche's own position within this landscape. As a radical skeptic deeply engaged with questions of language, knowledge, and truth, he seemed to anticipate many of the themes that would come to define the postmodern era. In a sense, he was a harbinger of the intellectual turmoil that would grip the modern world. Yet, amidst the chaos and despair, Nietzsche offered a glimmer of hope. He saw nihilism not as an end in itself, but as a necessary precursor to a profound transformation of human consciousness. In his view, the destruction of all interpretations of the world was a painful but essential step on the path to discovering a new, more authentic mode of existence. Nietzsche's words ring with a strange blend of optimism and foreboding. He speaks of nihilism as a crucible, a moment of profound self-reflection for humanity. Whether we emerge from this crisis stronger and more resilient, or succumb to its destructive force, is ultimately a question of our collective strength and will. But Nietzsche dares to entertain the possibility of redemption. He suggests that if we have the courage and resilience to confront nihilism head-on, we may yet find the clarity and purpose we seek. It's a tantalizing prospect, fraught with uncertainty and peril, but brimming with potential for profound transformation. In the end, Nietzsche's message is one of resilience and hope in the face of existential crisis. He challenges us to confront the abyss within ourselves, to wrestle with the void until we emerge on the other side, reborn and revitalized, ready to chart a new course for humanity. It's a daunting task, to be sure, but one that may ultimately lead to our salvation. Thank you for watching our video.